we are going to talk about the authorization framework. How many of you already are using ASP.NET Core, the core version? Okay. What about the others? So, did you already try .NET Core? How many of you never used .NET Core at all? Thank you. Whoa, that's cool. Everybody. Okay. You know, ASP.NET Core is running very, very fast. Has been written from scratch, has an amazing set of features. We have many good things to see in the framework, and I will talk about this good stuff. But first of all, I will introduce myself. I am an MVP, a Microsoft MVP. It's a long time. I mean, 15, I am going for 16 years. Every year I go to the MVP Summit in Redmond. A few weeks ago, we were in those amazing places in the campus in Microsoft, where, I mean, it's kind of, I have been invited in Moscow in Yandex, which is another place. I have a similar workplaces, and it's a really amazing experience where you really live and breathe technology and experience and development every time. It's fantastic. So I traveled all around the world. I have been in Russia, in Novosibirsk, in Moscow, and here in St. Petersburg. So it's great to be here again. See, yes, from time to time I am the silly man who wear the pirate flag and jump on the stage during hacking sessions, because I have been developer security MVP, and I enjoyed very much the dark side, just because, I mean, otherwise security is boring, right? Normally when we have to add those things about authorization, no, who cares about the security stuff? That's so bad when we are asked from our bosses, and we are said we have to be very careful because this data have to be secure. Come on, who cares? They will never find our endpoint, our secret endpoint. Boom. Now there is an additional reason. There is a GDPR in Europe, which is valid all across the world, because if you have something that is exposed to European citizens, you know, you have to comply, otherwise I don't know what can happen. But simply, I mean, they started fining, for example, few companies. I heard about different one in Europe. I don't want to name that, but that was bad. So basically, I have many good reasons for having a crush on ASP.NET Core. And this is my list. I mean, it's not something that you can see in the Microsoft slides. It's something that after my experience in working with ASP.NET Core, I decided to put in my preferred list. And the generic host for a non-visual application is one of them. And you know, now you have, if you use Visual Studio 2019, you have the worker template. Did you ever try it? Anyone here? So if you write a .NET new, you know that you can create a new project from there. And then now you have this .NET new, instead of typing console or typing ASP.NET or Angular or many other templates, you have the worker one. And if you prefer the visual environment, you have in Visual Studio the new file new, you go to ASP.NET, and you create a console application, yes, old-fashioned console application, but with all the advantages of having ASP.NET Core in your hands. So you have dependency injections, you have logging, you have configurations, you have everything prepared to run a console application, which is very good because of many reasons. First of all, because we are going, .NET has gone cross-platform. And so when we want to write a server application that runs both on Windows and also on Linux, of course the console application is your starting point. You can transform your console application in just a few keyboard taps in a service, either in a Windows service, thanks to the worker application, or in a Linux service. So it's extremely powerful. So you can make it start in the background when the operating system goes up. But this is not the topic for today. Outstanding performance under the whole request response. That's really huge. I mean, with the version 3, we have a number of astonishing numbers of the throughput. They saturated the 10 gigabit, of course, which is unbelievable. There is an entirely framework completely rewritten from scratch, which remove a few commodities that we had in the past, but we get rid of a lot of annoyance, and also the old web DLLs that were giving hits on the performance side. So one of the advantages is that now they can leverage the span of T and memory of T and pipelines and a lot of the new APIs that are inside the new .NET Core stuff. Have you tried the span of T, memory of T, and pipelines? Anyone? Yeah. They give you a huge performance gain, and this is the reason why, starting from version 3, ASP.NET Core will run only on .NET Core and no more on the .NET Framework. You know, during build last week, Microsoft announced that the framework 4.8 will be the last version of .NET Framework. So starting from the next year, we will only see new versions of .NET Core. And there are good reasons for that, because the .NET Framework cannot use the new version of the language. So you will never see like C#8 on the .NET Framework. And you will never see all the stuff that can use the ref and so on that Conrad will talk later on the .NET Framework. But they will be only on .NET Core. So it's extremely important. Cross-platform and container ready is something that I will discuss even tomorrow for the embedded environments. And that is extremely important because you can like ship a container with everything inside, even on a different platform, even on a different CPU architecture. The extensibility, as I said, the dependency injection is great, but also the background services, which are extremely powerful and let you give you a modular expansion of the architecture of your application. You can plug in and remove the services that you want to put inside. So basically, there are many other things that you can read on the slides. I mean, there is not something that you would like to miss. They are all important. But one of the things that I really appreciated is this part with that deals with the security and specifically with the authorization. I have to say that if you want, I leave you the slides about the performance. This is the official benchmark that Microsoft published, and comes from third parties, so it's trustable. And they reached #1 with the .NET Core 3. So you will enjoy that finally .NET Core succeeded over Node.js and the other popular frameworks, and that's a good thing. That's one of the important things is to improve on security from many aspects. One of these is for sure having everything that runs very smoothly regardless the new requirements that are imposed by the law. All over Europe, the GDPR has gone very wild in the companies because it's a kind of revolution you can imagine. If you or your company deals with European citizens in the database or have to deal with all the stuff, you will know that it's extremely important to comply to certain restrictions. And with .NET Core and the ASP.NET Core, you start from a template that already supports the basics. Of course, you have to do much more than this, but it's the basics is already supported inside the template that is extremely important. Of course, you can go very easily with the HTTPS, which is extremely important because you protect the channel. And those certificates are free, so it's basically very, very, very easy to comply. When you want to add the HTTPS only, I have two choices, either on the server side or either on the client side, or both, so that you force the client to use HTTPS, and that's a good thing. The authentication, I want to spend just a few words, because basically if you use the authentication, even in the old ASP.NET, the old version, so the MVC one, substantially it didn't change so much. I mean, it's basically the idea of authenticating a guy and asking the authentication is, who are you? And when you authenticate someone, you get the credentials, and in change you give a token. And inside the token, there is something that is extremely important. It's a set of information that tells you exactly who is this guy, and there are claims, which is the new wave of carrying important information about the user, that you have to trust. You cannot have any doubt about the content of the token. Once you have the token, the handshake already happened, and you know that that is fine. I mean, the content of the token is trustable, and you can use those information to authorize or deny the access to a given resource. Okay? So the very beginning starts from here. And the good thing is that in the past we had some glitches that now have been resolved with .NET Core 3. So identity server was one of the missing pieces inside the templates for the SPA, so the single page application that normally runs certain kind of web apps. Okay? Because you have services, you don't have interactive exchange. You cannot ask the username and password. You have to follow a different path with OAuth and all those things. So this is not the topic, but you may remember that starting from preview 3 and now there is preview 5, you now have the ability to integrate inside the Microsoft template. So inside the standard one, you can, if you choose the SPA, you have identity server plugged inside, and you are done. I mean, you have an identity provider if you want. But we have to focus on authorization. I have a lot of things to say. So once you obtain a token, what comes after? So, okay, I have the token, and now what can I do with it? So basically, we need the claims. The claims are the good parts that you want to achieve, you want to leverage. So the properties are the claims as a collection of all the truth that you have to trust in order to grant or not the access to the user. So that's the most important part. Then you have identities, which is plural. Why? There are multiple identities? Yes, you can have multiple identities inside a single token. Usually, you will use just the first identity, which is extremely interesting because it's the authenticated user. But you know what? If you want to implement the impersonation, for example, because you are acting as another user, you want to bring two identities, or maybe more. And that's interesting because in your application, you can leverage the power of multiple identities and knowing exactly what's happening. So let's say, for example, that I am a user browsing your website, and you know in place you authenticate myself, which is good, and you obtain a token. But then later on, your service will go to another service that will try to access different resources. And you may want to flow that token inside your architecture, inside your set of services in the back end. And so you can add more identities inside the same token so that you can have the collection of all the guys, virtual or not, so services or physical users, that are going to access the resource, which is extremely important because this is one of the most frequently asked questions from both the client, so your customer, and from the PM who is saying, what's the service that is accessing this stuff? Which is the service who deleted this row on the database? Who made this change? So you can track everything, and this is super important to have multiple identities. Of course, since the first one is so important, this will return the first of them, which is the main, normally the user that has been authenticated. So then you have a lot of methods to deal with the identities, to deal with the claim, and so on, but they are pretty easy, as you can see. There is a compatibility one that is easy in role. Is it in role or not? Because the role is a special claim that brings a kind of flag, let's say, that say, I am a claim that acts as if it was an old role. Okay? So claim is something that is extending the concept of the role, because the role is Boolean, is saying, I am inside this role, I am outside this role. While the claim is giving you a value. So you can have a claim that is the age, and you have the age of the person inside. Instead, you may want to transform the claim of the age is has the majority, can drink alcohol, for example. Can he drive a car? Okay, so true or false. On the claim identity, which is the one that we have here, we have many things that are directly related to the authentication method, which is important, which you can find even inside the claim, because knowing which method was used to authenticate the guy is important. For example, banks use this system to know, oh, the user just logged in with username and password. Okay, that's the first level. And I will show you your bank details. But if you want to move to make a transfer of some money, oh, I need the special number from the key so that I can have an additional proof that you are the owner of your account, because the physical key is in possess only of the user that owns the bank account, right? It makes sense? So you have multiple steps, and you can request multiple information and gain different type of authentication. And then all the methods and so on. Then we have, now we know what the claims are and how important they are, but we have to distinguish two kinds of claims. The user claims, that are the ones that comes from the token given from the identity provider. So if I obtain the token from Facebook, let's say, Facebook can fill the token with certain claims, which are very important. For example, if you create a Facebook app, you can Facebook app that targets having an identity provider. So you want to authenticate via Facebook. You can ask, for example, of additional friends, the city where you live, of course the email, which is the default, and many other information that are not the basic ones. Okay? So the minimum set is that I have authenticated you. The second set is I want your email, for example, or your name, your address, and so on. Everything that you can put in addition to the basic information is something that is not strictly required. And the user claims are the ones that are specific, given from the identity provider, from the user. So it's something that is related to the user identity and nothing more. But when this token is going to be spent inside the application, you need additional information. Before or later, you have to associate this user with some special thing that he has to do inside your application. So let's imagine an application that trade some things. I can buy a few objects or goods from you, and you can buy some other objects or goods from the others. And this mechanism is important because you want to know what kind of things you can do inside this special application. So you have to distinguish from the claims that identify yourself that are given from the identity provider to the ones that are specific of your application. This distinction is important. If you mess the two, you will find that the application gets harder to be written. This is an experience that I brought with me. So the first step is that once I get the token, I immediately want to transform the token in something more complex. I want to increase, to make the token fatter, so put more claims that are application specific. So this can be done in several ways. I mean, in the past, when we used SOAP, we could use a kind of identity provider that transformed the token, so decrypted the token, re-encrypted the token with more claims inside, and SAML used it to promote this kind of architecture, this philosophy. But if you want to make this transformation inside your application, you can simply use a very, very simple claim transformer, which is an interface that is available inside the ASP.NET Core, and you can register inside the application that you wrote. So let's see the code, for example. So we start from this fictional application where, you know, in the startup, we will find most of the things that are configured in our application. Can you see the code from the end? Yes? Okay. In the configure services in ASP.NET Core, we configure what are the services, so what we have available to be used inside the controllers and even in other services. So we wanted to use the cookies in order to recognize that the user is coming back. We want to use a database. I use the SQLite, which is very comfortable for me when I travel with a single PC. I don't want to start and stop SQL Server, but you can easily switch between the two. And so if you want to use a different database, it's fine. And we can see that here I have the SQLite DB in my Solution Explorer. Then we can add the identity, which correlates the identity user identity role, which is the default for ASP.NET Core Authentication, so nothing special here. And I also support storing the information for the user inside this application DB context, which is mapped inside SQLite DB as well. And we added the default token providers and the default UI, which means that if you want to register as a user in the application, you simply have the default pages from ASP.NET that you can scaffold by yourself and customize in a different way if you don't like the default ones. And that is good. Then we add the authentication with add cookie, and adding a different provider is as simple as these three options. You see, I added Facebook, Microsoft account, and Google. Of course, it requires you to do some little work of configuring on the server side. On Facebook, you have to create a Facebook app that recognizes your application. And the same in a similar way with the Microsoft account and the Google account. You have to configure on Google and Microsoft backends how it works. And thanks to the user secrets, I have my secrets of the configuration inside my profile. Then I make, this is my own register handler, so that I will show in a moment. I add the authorization stuff, which is used to register the policies that, again, are a thing that I created for myself. So we will see in a moment these two guys in action. And finally, this is the claim transformation I was mentioning before in the slides. So basically, I am saying, hey, ASP.NET, if you want, I want to transform a claim, I will register iClaim transformation with my claim transformer, which basically does a very simple thing in my case. So since this is a demo, I use this transform async in order to inject new claims here. And I say, okay, if the user is called this, I simply say that he has to, he's able to have these accesses that I call it LCURUD, so have the full access on the articles. And in addition to the CRUD, the typical CRUD is the list. So the first is an L for list. So my PC is going to die, sorry. Something bad happened. And basically, this means this is the equivalent path that you will do if you have you receive the name during this process, only at the moment of the login. And you can put there your database query. Yes, there is a ghost that is typing. Okay. So during the transformation, you can put an asynchronous call to the database that query your own database tables and look up the additional account, the additional claim that you want to add to the token of the user. And that's it. So Control Z, and I save my demo. Okay. You see, there is nothing more. I simply give less power depending on the user, but basically I am adding some claims for this purpose. So what it means? It means that I transformed the claim. I didn't ask Facebook to put something special. I didn't modify the Facebook application in order to make those article access available to the claims. I could do it, but I prefer to stay away from this. I want just to identify my user using an external identity provider or even my own, and then having a claim transformation that adds the required things specific to this application. Okay. Sorry. So we have, if you have questions about managing, I deleted this slide. There is a framework called Policy Server, with which substantially helps you in managing a more complex situation where you have the policies that you want to externalize. So if you have questions on this, we will see later on. I want to focus on a different things. Now, there is the good part. So the new authorization framework starts from here. We have finally a token with a lot of claims, and they are all relevant to our application because I have both the identity provider one and the ones that you added coming from a database or whatever you have. Now the framework tells me I have the need to authorize a certain page or a certain resource. How can I structure the logic of this? ASP.NET Core answered to the question by structuring three concepts that are policies, requirements, and handlers. The policies are very simple because they are basically containers, a set of requirements. So they simply are a way to group a number of requirements. The requirements are another concept that is requirements. It's something that you absolutely need in order to authorize someone. Okay? There is still no logic inside the requirement. At least they can bring some information, such as the name of the resource or something that you may want to store it. But they basically describe something that is required for your application to happen. Okay? To give to make the authorization happen. The good part is the handler. The handler contains the authorization logic and is structured so that it's just one handler, a single handler, grants the access, automatically the requirement is satisfied. So if you think in a Boolean way, the requirements are all required, and it's structured in AND. So it's the AND condition. And if you look at the handlers, they are in the OR condition. So you basically can build your application, your structure, your application logic, combining the ANDs and the OR of your authorization predicates in order to split across the requirements and the handlers. That's the part that give you the full representation of the filter that will be made against the user identity. When I will show you some code so that we can focus better on what is this stuff. So, when we were at the startup, we went to the registration. This registration is very handy because I created my own extension method, register handlers, that added several singletons. So the first rule is that you have to register in the dependency injection all the handlers that they are the guys who contain the logic of your authorization. Typically, you want to add them as a singleton because they are stateless, and so you save time in destroying and recreating them. So it makes sense to create those. In a moment, we will enter each one of these, but you see that is very simple, the register handlers. The register policies is the one who is saying, I want to add a policy, and the first one is a name. So I created an alias for this. You see as just a constant inside a different class, which say, I want to add the policies where I add as a requirement the list requirement. And what is this list requirement, for example? It's a class that is empty. It's just an authorization requirement. It's nothing more. So it's a way to tag a requirement. It's just a name, okay? And you may be surprised to know that the requirement does not refer directly the handlers, but it happens the opposite. And that's for a good reason, not to have the dependencies one on each other. So you have handlers that express directly the concept that they are associated to a given requirement. So if we come back to the handlers, you see that the handler is a class that derives from authorization handler, specifically tagging the list requirement, which we have seen is empty, is an empty class, so it's just a tag, nothing more. The good part is that when we have to handle the authorization, and we will see in a moment how the authorization is triggered, what is called? It's called the handle requirement async, passing the context, which is the context that you can access also the HTTP stuff, the user, and many other things, and the list requirement itself, which is funny because you say it's empty, okay? So you can use either empty because you just need to have a tag, and so I know that is part of the list requirement, so I know what to do because of this, or otherwise you can have a list requirement that inside have some parameters or some additional data that you want to store in it. Okay, and we will see also this case. Before going into authorization logic, I will step back in a moment, and everything will become a bit easier. So the authorization handler is the one that contains the core logic, and that's very important, because once you have the requirement to satisfy, and you have the speaker requirement here, you see that inside the handle requirement async, you have access to the user. You have access to the claims as well, because of course the user is the principle that we have seen in the first slides, that contains both the identity, which is the user, and also the claims. So you can access the claims, and you can check if there is a given claim. So in this specific example of the slide, I am saying I have the requirement before letting Raffaele the access to go in that page that he is a speaker. How can I know that he is a speaker? Okay, I read the identity, and then I check that he has inside his claim a claim whose claim type is named speaker. And as I said before, if you receive a token, this is your truth. You cannot have any doubt about the content of the token. So you have a kind of guarantee that everything that is inside the token is the truth. So once you have checked that inside the claim there is a claim type that is the one that you are looking for, that's okay. And if you want to leverage the full power of the claim, you can even check the value of the claim that I didn't make inside this, which gives you additional power in seeing. I can check, for example, the age of someone and say, I want to know that you have a claim that is named age, but then I want to know that the value of the age is over 18, let's say, okay? One of the main concepts that is extremely important is the way we exit the function, okay? The way we exit the method is absolutely fundamental, and you have to remember this. So if we call succeed, we are granting the access. If you exit in any way, so just with doing nothing, or with an exception, there is no grant at all. So you don't need to deny. You just call succeed if you are super sure that the user is complying the requirements that you need. So, said that, on the slide before, it makes sense. So I'm saying, if you have a policy, all the requirements have to be satisfied. It's the end condition. And then, at least one of the handlers inside each of the requirements have to succeed. I just need one, but at least one have to go okay. Otherwise, denied. Does it make sense? So, one of the historical problems that we had with authorization is when you have to authorize something that regards with a specific resource. It's too easy to say, if you're a speaker, you can browse all my website. That's okay. I mean, it's an easy one. But what about if you have access depending on the specific resource that you have to access? What happens? How can we manage this? So there is another kind of authorization handler that have two generic types. The first is still the requirement, but the second is the resource. And we are just saying, okay, if I am the owner of a given article or object or good and so on, I can always access the data that is regarding this resource. Okay? It makes sense. I am the owner, so I am granted. How can I know if I am the owner? I receive a resource as a generic type, so in this case it's an article, and the handler requirement async has a different method that takes a parameter which is the actual resource that I have to authorize. If I want to grant access, I have to grant access on this specific instance of the article. That's it. Can I access this specific object? Yes or not? Of course, you may understand that during the web page that we will see in a moment, it totally changed the way you can express the requirement of the request of access. In the first case, you can even put the old attribute, authorize. In the second, I have to be specific. I have to ask the authorization for that specific instance of the object. It's a totally different way of seeing it. And so the logic is straightforward, of course. So do you want to authorize or reject the access? Well, as we said, at least one handler must succeed. It's okay. If we want to deny, just exit the method. Doesn't matter how you exit. But if something really bad happened, like you have the database is crashed, you cannot continue, and so on, they also added a method that they call it context.fail that stop immediately all the whole process and deny the access. So how can I trigger the authorization check? This is the one that we all know. If you ever had the occasion to use the authorization in ASP.NET, even the old one, you know the authorize was there. And we have to specify this time the name of the policy. In this case, the read article policies. And that's it. You can specify more arguments, but that's the easy part. As soon as you have to use, to give access to a specific resource, which is, I mean, most of the cases, you have the imperative authorization, which means basically called specifically from your code the authorize as async. And if something went wrong, so if it doesn't succeed, you have to call challenge result to stop the page, and you will be redirected directly to the page that handles the unsuccessful access. So the ASP.NET Core takes care of the rest. The default is redirecting to the login page because maybe you want to use a different identity, or you have to trigger the button of your special code and get an additional claim. And in the Razor code, it is basically the same. So you have C# code, so it's exactly the same. Before going to the policy provider, I will show you briefly the rest of the code. How 10 minutes?
Around 10 minutes.
10 minutes. You said 10 hours? No. Okay.
Around that.
Okay. I will do my best. So the pages are very interesting. So if we go to the articles and this is the default way to express a page. If you let the ASP.NET to scaffold the page given an article and that is mapped on the database, you will create this set of pages. So all the UI was done from the scaffolding of ASP.NET. There is nothing special. I just modified the code for this page. And you see that I leverage the dependency injection to obtain a few things. Of course, you should always trigger in the logger factory so that you have your own logger here. You have the authorization service, which is extremely good to receive via the dependency injection, and the context, of course, so to access the database. So when it comes to accept the post async, because we are in the creating page, we just call authorize async and I say, okay, I have this user, which is contextual to the page, so it's an easy one. I have this article, which is the one, of course, that have been put here from the bind property, so that we know what is the article that I'm creating at this moment. And I express also which is the name of the policy that I want to trigger. So since during the register, blah, 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 I said this create articles is associated to this requirement, which, of course, is mapped to the specified handler, of course, the required logic will be triggered on, and that's very, very simple. If something bad happens, so if I am not authorized, I am going to call challenge result instead and logging, of course, the failure. That is. If you go to the other pages, you see that we basically have exactly the same thing. So first, in the delete, I first retrieve the article from the database, then I authorize passing the article itself, and again, I exit the page, I am done. And again, with the details, you have here the same structure, because I am accessing a specific article. So this is nothing specific. I mean, there is nothing difficult here, because it's the easy one. I want to show you a different thing. You have like a two-way now. You may want to trigger dynamic policies, because maybe you want to have a generic website where the policies are not known when you compile. And this is one of the answers. And you may want to customize the behavior of your application in the authorization terms dynamically, and you can use the policy providers. So this is just a way to suggest you to take a look. And the other way is, what about the lists? So I have shown you the C RUD, okay? The create, the read, the update, and the delete. But there is a problem that when I list all the articles, what you want to do with the authorization? You want to deny all the items just because there is one that you potentially cannot access? Or you want to be able to either see them all or nothing? That's not good, right? What about filtering the content based on your capabilities as a user? That is the hard part, I mean, right? So the first strategy is that, okay, I load everything from the database, and then I filter in memory the results, and then of course I have to paginate in memory because the pagination that is gently offered from Entity Framework Core has gone. You cannot leverage anymore that. So you have to do queries in memory. And there is the risk that you have very bad performance because when you are paginating in memory, you already loaded tons of articles that potentially the user cannot see. And so you have a lot of aggressive access to the database that is useless. The strategy number 2 is, okay, I modify all the requests to load only the authorization data. That means that I have to customize all the queries to the database, adding the filter from the user, which is not exactly a breathe. I mean, I have a customer that has like 600 pages, and it's a nightmare when he have to touch each one of these. It's unbelievable. And the risk to put some bugs is very, very error prone. So the strategy number 3 is the short one. This is, I mean, the easiest way. You know, Entity Framework Core has a feature called global filters that allows you to plug a filter that is applied every time you access a given table. So if you are going to access the articles, they give you the opportunity to establish which is the filter that you want to be injected automatically every time you make a filter that touch in some way that specific table on the database, which is good. But you end up in having very bad performance as soon as you have very nasty join tables in 3 or 4 times because you discover that you are filtering multiple times the same tables, and the overall performance is quite bad. So the strategy is mixing the two. I want to use an injection method. And on the other side, I want to be able to avoid the mess of patching everything manually. And so then strategy number 4 is for people who loves the code generation like me. So you basically use an expression visitor and say, I add a new link operator that say, I want to dynamically filter for this article and for this user. And you have to add the required special filter inside the expression. And this is what I did on this solution. I want to show you the list page, of course, otherwise it's useless. Okay. And on this version, I have, sorry, in this one, okay. The get async, because I have a longer story, when I have more time, I can show you before and after. So I have to show you after, otherwise we cannot stay in the 10 minutes. So the get async, the final version, is that we have the authorize async just to see if he can or not see the whole list. So maybe there are users like a guest cannot even see a single item, and so it's useless to make a filter for nothing, and we want to exclude the guest immediately. Then I get the maturity of the user, for example, the maturity in the context of this application, that, by the way, I will leave you the source code on GitHub so that you can see it, is the age, and then the username. And I want to query, to list all the articles in a asynchronous way, but I want to enforce age and owner. What is this guy? This guy is an extension method that I created that extends the iQueryable, take the username and maturity. Maturity, as you can see, is just the classification of the maturity of the user. Very simple. And this basically wraps the extension method using as visitors and saying, I want you dynamically add the condition to check those properties of the user inside the query that was written by the author of the controller. So that's it. And this is done in this separate data filtering stuff. And it is possible thanks to the custom query compiler, which is the query compiler is a piece of the engine of Entity Framework Core, that every time it is executed, you basically intercept the expression and goes and see what expression is going to be executed. And then we have this enforces visitors. I don't know if you are familiar or not with the visitors, but basically the expression visitor is something that take an expression, visit all the tree, and is able to change the behavior, to rewrite pieces or delete other pieces, okay? And we basically have the prepare here the number of the properties to check. You see, I prepare the property of owner, the maturity, the state of the article, the buyer, and so on. And I visit the method call that is enforce agent owner. So I search for my own extension method. I bring the maturity and the username because I need some parameters to modify it. I take this one, and I finally create a predicate. So if we go here and we try the application that I didn't show you yet, and I'm sorry for this, but I am running very fast. This is the application finally. Okay, I can log out, I can log in again. I say I want to log in as a child. I log in, okay. Articles, boom, we are here. We are checking the context succeed requirement. And I'm now inside the enforcer. And you see the username is child at email, blah, blah, blah. I have the maturity, which is child. I take some parameters, and I finally create the article predicate. If I go to see the details of this, which is not very handy to see, basically I created the maturity is less or equal the maturity that has been passed as a parameter, and then the owner is blah, 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 and or, and so on. So this is the condition that I want to add dynamically to the logic, giving only a couple of parameters. And I can modify on the fly what is the query that have to be injected inside the query that is going to the database. And this means that I have these two items only, and from our query here, I can see that I created a where that is much complex than the one that I didn't even express inside the list, because I just requested a list of all articles, but it has been injected a where on the database. The good part of this is that you basically have the logic, the authorization logic, only on C#. And thanks to the link expression, we could express the logic even in terms of SQL Server and avoid to make a bad performance query on the database and obtain a result that is compliant to the requirements that we have. So one of the points that are extremely important is that you have to design your application with the authorization in mind, and the constraint of your authorization have to be very application specific, or at least specific to a set of applications that goes that have the same kind of requirements. You can share the authorization only if you have really similar business. It's a kind of what is your domain topic. I deal with books. Okay, you have this authorization set that can be shared with another application that deals with books, but you cannot share different domains with the same authorization. This is why the authorization framework that I cited before, so the policy server that you have briefly seen in the slides, is not something that solves the problem in the whole, but is kind of helping structuring the thing and nothing more. It's not something that is going to save your life from the authorization perspective. One of the things that I recommend is that this framework, the way the ASP.NET Core allow you to structure the logic in handlers and the requirements, helps you in writing the code in many different places that are easy to unit test. And this is super important, because unit testing the authorization part is fundamental to comply to the legislation. For example, I recommend to take the report of the tests and attach them to the GDPR report, because this is a very good way from the regulation perspective to comply to the GDPR. So you have to be very structured and build a kind of dossier of things that goes with the authorization. Otherwise, it can be very messy to maintain the code and to prove that you did a good job with the authorization. I'm sorry if I had to run a little bit too much, and I want to thank you very much for being here, and I am done. Thank you. By the way, if you have questions, then you can reach me later. I want to leave Conrad all the space that he deserves for the next presentation.
It's not time for Conrad time. It's time for a small break for food.
Okay, during the food we can...
Yeah, you can, if you want, you can ask questions now, and we will bring mic for you.
Before or later?
Or any volunteers, yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for material you bring to us. I have a question about lifetime of contacts. When you get the claims,
yes,
and after some time, administrator wants to, for example, delete user or ban it, and we make changes to database, but we get valid credentials and claims from user, and he continue to work. How we can verify that he is still active, and how we should check that he is able to access the articles?
Let me see that if I understand. There are multiple things here. So the first is that it depends from the authentication system, because maybe you want to externalize in a different application the user authentication. So that's the first part. It may be external, like third parties like Facebook, or maybe yours, third party. The second part is that you have some data that is owned by the user that you use it to associate with claims, and so that he have special permissions to access certain data. And the GDPR template that I mentioned on the slide basically tells you if the user want to go away, he can decide to delete his data, and when you press the button, he should be able to delete really everything. So it depends on you how do you to implement the handler of the button. By default, the data that is deleted is the one that is the authentication related with the default template from ASP.NET Core. So basically, he deletes all the user, all the claims, and the thing that is related to them. Of course, you have orphan items in your case, because you want to correlate that user to the access to the article. And so that special claim, what happens? You can leave it. So I give you a suggestion from the regulation perspective. So if you want to comply to the GDPR, maybe even if you don't want, is a good idea too, is that you create a fake replacement for the deleted user, so that you have a ghost. You cannot relate this ghost with that user specifically. This is very important for GDPR. You should not be able to, even in the future, understand, given the data, who was that user. Even if there is his name inside, doesn't matter. You cannot relate to his identity anymore. So if you ghost these records, is the best way, because you preserve the database, and then in a second moment, you may want to clean all the data that has been deleted like more than like 6 months ago and things like that.
So if we want to invalidate a user, we should check every request and do this user exist in the database?
Well, if the user login, it makes sense to check. Otherwise, they are just records on the database that you will not use anymore. So you don't have to check anything for the user that doesn't exist anymore. It's just the query that is there. If you look at how ASP.NET Core implemented the identity, you will see that the abandoned users, that the inactive users, simply are ignored. They are here on the database, but if they don't try to log in, they are never used. So, you're welcome.
Okay, I think one more question and then we'll do the break.
Okay.
Thank you for the talk. I have a quick question about GDPR. What do you think about it? Because there's a lot of discussion about how good it is, is it a good thing at all? Because we have not really a similar, but in some sense similar thing in Russia, where the government says that personal data should be located inside country only. But from my perspective, it's pretty tricky, because why I can't decide where my personal data can be located, because it's my personal data. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I do care about the GDPR, but in technical terms only. I mean, I can interpret I studied a lot the regulation. I gave a lot of talks about the GDPR specific things. I can say that if you want to comply the GDPR, you have to take a look to the Microsoft SDL security development lifecycle procedures, because they are very similar. I have no doubt that the GDPR guys studied the SDL and also the OWASP general prescription in order to create the regulation itself. So if you make a threat model, if you follow the rules that SDL prescribes, you will pretty much end in being compliant with the GDPR as well. Take a look at that, and from the user right perspective, I have no answer. I mean, it depends from the countries. I do not agree with all the statements of the GDPR. I mean, they really shoot it very high. I mean, that's too much. But that's it. I mean, it's a law. You have to respect it. It's a piece with myself. I can only suggest a technical answer to comply.